back to another episode of Detonation, where we are putting death out of business. And it's an Australian episode here today. Actually, a Melbourne episode here today. We're actually both in Melbourne, and that's pretty exciting because it's hardly... it's very hard to find anybody on this side of the pond, this side of the world, that has anything interesting to say. But we actually got somebody with something interesting to say. He's a friend of mine, and unfortunately, we didn't play the poker, but we'll get around to that someday. It's Nick. Hey, Nick, how you going?
Hey, I'm good, Steele. How you doing?
Fantastic. Yeah, so you grew up on Canberra's south side. Canberra, for the international audience, is the capital of Australia. It's a tiny little city in the middle of Nowheresville, and it's for some reason it's the federal seat. And that you grew up on the south side and was raised by a health economist mother and a senior public executive father. So there's a lot of involvement with the public service there, federal government.
Heaps.
All that sort of stuff. You attended ANU, so did I, graduating in 2015 with a BA majoring in philosophy, which is pretty cool, and a minor in mathematics, which is even better. And we've talked a lot about you and I about Ayn Rand and these ones and that ones, and so we've had long conversations about all this. He currently lives in Melbourne, works in a court transcript formatter, and is an avid music fan. You're even the Knicks, right?
It's the Ians, yeah.
The Ians, not the Knicks, the Ians, that's right. Yeah. And
when I moved to Melbourne, the guy I was living with, he called me Ian for the first 2 months just because I was in the band of Ians, and you sort of did the reverse just then.
Yeah. Yeah, so to the best of his knowledge, he's one of those humble people. He's not an expert in anything, master of... Yeah, so jack of all trades, master of none sort of idea. Very philosophically aligned principles there.
I beg pardon, sorry?
Very philosophically aligned principles.
Oh, you and I? Yeah, for sure, I would say. Certainly more alignment than I find with other people in my day-to-day life, that's for sure.
Yeah, so you tell us about your band, the Ians.
They go all right. I'm not crazy fan of the name, and we haven't been releasing stuff nearly as much as, say, a year or two ago. Like, the last single we did was about a year ago now, which was good. Like, it got 15,000 views, but yeah, like, I don't know, music for me just was, like, I was doing it a lot less. I was caring a lot less. So yeah, kind of ended up taking an office job a couple months ago, which I've actually really been digging, so.
Yeah, cool. In the court, right?
Yeah. It's for a company called Spark and Cannon. It's not amazingly interesting. It's just someone records court proceedings, someone else writes them down. I put them together, check them for certain legal requirements, send them to clients. It's simple as that. Went home early today because both of my courts adjourned at 1 o'clock. So I go home early on those days.
Yeah, that's
and I'm a bit sick as well. Sorry, that's the other reason I went home. So sorry if I snuffle during the. I'll be snuffling.
Snuffleupaly. So it's all good. No problem. Yeah, no, it's really cool, and it's raining here in Melbourne, and it's a pretty miserable day. So everyone will forgive you. It doesn't matter. You have some interesting points anyway. So that's really good to know. So let's talk about what you wanted to talk about, which is turning the country, any country, a hypothetical country, into a joint stock corporation, essentially. What is your talking point? What is your idea? Let's flesh it out. It's interesting.
Yeah. So generally speaking, like, I want to just make this point here now. Like, it's not a critical thing. It's not like a Marxist saying me to go do this right now. Tomorrow is the best time. It's literally me just presenting an idea and saying that this is interesting. I've come across this. People that are much smarter than me have come up with a very similar thing. Maybe we should talk about it. Like, I mean, it's an interesting idea. So just going back to my notes, basically, so what we're looking for is noticing the correlation between government hierarchies and corporate hierarchies, and why one seems to be unbelievably efficient and the other one seems to be a bit lacking sometimes. And a large part of this, it is my contention at least, is that there is a strong lack of vested interest I kind of hate name dropping this guy, but people that like Nassim Nicholas Taleb will notice this instantly as skin in the game, is what this sort of very popular kind of thing that's doing the rounds at the moment. But the same basic principle applies: vested interest, skin in the game, call it what you like. The idea is that voters don't necessarily have the long-term welfare of a state as in their interests. On the surface, maybe they might sort of seem to. I mean, they're a citizen of the country. You would think that they would care about what's happening in that country 50 years from now, but we know the reality of that is not really the same. So basically, here's the analogy. You can consider the executive branch of a government, our government, for example, as kind of like a CEO, chief executive officer, executive branch. They can hire and fire people at will, basically. Parliament is effectively a board of directors, which is voted in for by the shareholders. Shareholders being, in this instance, in our liberal democracy, effectively one person equals one share. And it sounds like a pretty great idea, and I know a lot of people that they're not unserious people, and they still very much back the idea of liberal democracy. But it does have this difficulty in getting over this problem of voter interest, especially in the long term. You can't just consider the short term. So yeah, what's effectively what I would like to see, not to say again, it's not a critical Marxist thing. I don't want to go out and do this tomorrow. But what I would like to see is a shift from that informal system of power, informal power structure, to a highly formalized power structure. You have more shares, you get more of a say. You have no shares, you get no say. Is effectively how it would be. Which, I mean, at the end of the day, for the people, a lot of the big kickback I get from people in this system is they say, well, what about the people that would have no say because they'd have no shares? And then you just point out to the 20 million plus Australians that all get one vote each. So they all get 20 million for the total voting power. This is effectively nothing. So yeah, that's the first counter argument that comes up, and then that's the first counter argument, which comes straight after it. But I've been talking for a while, and I'm actually very interested to get your opinion.
Yeah, well, this is kind of an interesting idea. I mean, America, they call them the CEOtists, right? It's the POTUS CEOtists, because a lot of left-leaning people are very critical of the fact that governments resemble too much like a corporation, like a. And it's kind of interesting. But what about this idea of how we break down voting? And let's look at Australia, for example. America's a little bit different with a federalist system, but Australia, for example, you vote in a local member to represent local people. It's representative government. You vote in a state member to represent a state interest. That's the state representation. And then you go up to the federal level to vote in for federal interests, right? And that's so. What happens to representation when everybody's voting as a corporate idea? What happens to representation? Is everybody represented fairly in that notion, or is it something different?
So I don't know the nitty gritty. I don't know exactly how you would get this system to work, which is one of the big reasons why I'm not like, hey, let's do this tomorrow, because I don't have all the answers. But what I do know is that, so if you go back to the analogy with the board of directors and representing parliament, there's no reason in principle that you couldn't still have a local, state and federal tiers. What could also potentially happen is this system potentially might not lend itself to, like, we look at countries like China or America or even Australia, just in terms of landmass, and we see, like, that's a country, that's a nation size, whereas people thousands of years ago would have been horrified at a nation this large. So it's possible that if you did try this system, the best way for it to work would be for it to, you'd separate Australia into patches. So you have, like, the sovereign nation of Victoria effectively, and the sovereign nation of Queensland, and the sovereign nation of New South Wales. So if that was the case, then that would answer your question. But again, I don't know how exactly to implement it.
Before federation, we used to have pretty much sovereign nations of all the states, and then we federated, and because we decided that having 7 different armies and 7 different navies was not a good idea. It was
Well, arguably a mistake, depending on who you talk to. I personally am of the opinion that this can work at a federal level as we understand it now.
Okay, cool. I wonder about Okay, let's representation. Okay, what about justice? What about the judicial system? How would justice be enacted if it's a corporate idea? Because corporations, they lean towards efficiency.
Yeah.
That's what corporations do. They have sort of,
What do you mean,
um,
justice? I'm just confused.
yeah, sure. So corporations lean towards efficiency, right? But
Mhm.
um, and governments lead towards sort of bureaucracy, and sometimes lumbering bureaucracy gets in the road, but sometimes lumbering bureaucracy, because of all the rules and constraints and because of treaties and all these other things, they can guide guide justice and have just outcomes because of the courts and because of treaties and international agreements and internal
Yeah.
reformations, and lots and lots of wars have been fought over. I mean, for example, slavery in the United States.
Hmm.
It's a line on a sheet saying, "Are you a slave? Do we think slavery is a good thing or a bad thing?" Now, and then all these people die, and then the line gets changed, and everyone goes on happy or not happy or whatever. But that's how it works, right? So, I'm thinking, how is it that if how is it that you have these moral, ethical, justice type debates in Parliament with a corporate board of directors that's geared towards a
Yeah.
CEO that's geared towards efficiency? Because if you go into any corporate boardroom, it's how do I sell more products? How do I engage customers? How do we pump out more units per hour at a
Hmm.
lower cost? I mean, are these really the type of debates you only want to be having? I mean, where does justice come into that? Where does ethics
Yeah.
come into that? Where
So
does
there's two issues there. First of all, just kind of you're jumping a bit between the judicial branch or the duties of the judicial branch and the legislative branch. So the judicial branch, as far as I'm aware, would sort of just keep plugging away that it usually does. As for the legislative branch, like I understand what you're talking about. Like it's hard to understand that you could have purely financial incentives for these people to make decisions, but ultimately they can use those. They happen not to in certain instances, yeah, as it stands. But there's no reason that they don't have to. So you can boil a lot of things down to numbers, and even when you can't, you still have 200 human beings in the room, let's say, just to spitball a number, and they'll be able to do what you're like asking them to do effectively. Does that make sense?
Yeah, and so the grand conspiracy out there in the world is that that the private central banks are owned by private entities and they have private shareholders under the Bank of International Settlements, and
Yeah.
that basically countries are, like you go shopping for a car or you go shopping for a house or an asset, right? And
Mm.
the grand theme of these conspiracy theories is that instead of instead of opening up a book and looking at a new house to buy as an asset, these people turn country pages, turn pages. Do you want to buy the Maldives today, or do you want to buy this country? It's got this ROI, it's got that ROI,
Right,
it's got
right,
these
right.
social problems and those social problems. Do you think that if that scenario was hypothetically true, I mean, wouldn't the system that we have now? I mean, Australia would be an expensive country to buy under that system. It would be a really expensive country to buy, but the ROI would be quite high, right? It'd be like buying a Burger King or a McDonald's. I mean, it's expensive to invest in, but the ROI is quite high. The workers are quite efficient. Everyone's in the uniform. I mean, wouldn't your suggestion be breaking out of that mold? Because wouldn't the countries as they are have the efficiency means, and which is why they're surviving as they are, and they're not being invaded by someone like the United States? Do you understand what I mean?
Sort of, yeah. I mean, there's a lot of reasons that country doesn't get invaded by the United States, but you got to remember with this system that like it's not. It is like a company, but it's not exactly like a company. Amazon doesn't have to worry about it's like imagine a company where everyone that worked for the company lived in the company. That would be the that would be this kind of joint stock Australia. So that's kind of like a big part of it, is that it's similar, but it's not exactly the same.
So what happens to the constitution of any of these countries if would they amend to a corporate constitution? What's the output structure? Is it voted on by the shareholders?
If you were to do this in the real world, all the constitutions would stay the same. It would be really, really important to the people at large that their constitutions don't change. What you would do is you'd be pulling strings from behind to change the legislative and the judicial interpretation process in America, at the very least. But mostly the legislative processes, you'd just be tweaking things behind them, if that makes any sense. Like, I can't imagine, like, people's vote, for example, is of such symbolic importance to them that you just can't get rid of it. What history has demonstrated to be the case over and over again is that if it's getting in the way and it's genuinely causing a problem, you can find ways to sidestep around that. Best example is Singapore, when I think about it.
Yeah, let's talk about Singapore.
What do you want to know? There's a lot of.
Well, it's got the biggest, like, the economic freedom index. It's always economically free. It's
got
basically
a
like
healthcare standard. Education is incredible. A lot of people have 2 phones, not 1. In fact, that's the normal. That's normal from what I've seen in Singapore. What's interesting, like, when I went to Japan 2 weeks ago, and I was talking to a guy from Singapore, and I was asking him about the government, and the first thing that he said was, it's definitely a bit more dictatorial. So he's openly understands the nature of their government, right? Like, they don't have freedom of assembly. We have freedom of assembly in Australia. I've never really used it, but I'm sure someone cares about it. But they don't have it in Singapore. And so you've got this one guy who's talking about Singapore openly as if it's dictatorial, and he's just a part of the citizenry. Alternatively, you have the case, which we do have in Australia, which is where pollies and, like, senior level bureaucrats will openly joke about the fact we live in an elected dictatorship. Whereas that's not really something that people talk about, just the citizenry doesn't talk about that very often. But it's an open joke. It's a real thing. It's been happening for decades. So, I mean, which system do you want to live under ultimately?
In democracies, you end up with this 2-tier system that it becomes what they call the revolving elite, right? And the parties, this is, and it really starts to make you really wonder about what is the definition of democracy, because in a country like Australia, I mean, the definition of democracy for the Liberal and Labor is if you vote Liberal and Labor, you're being democratic. If you go outside of that norm, then suddenly you're a threat to democracy. And it's like, hang on, what are you guys talking about? There's plenty of countries around the world, the US is meddled in, that are democratic countries that have a democratically elected people, and they go in saying, we need to protect democracy. But hang on, the people elected person X. And
that's like the idea of guided popular sovereignty. Like, the people are always right, except when they're not. And then you have to guide them. Yeah, it's annoying. It's stupid.
And people, in this country, even in this country, I mean, there's small parties like both on the left and on the right, and when people gravitate towards them, the media starts to scream. They start to say this is a threat to our democratic rights, and it's simply because they're breaking down the natural norm of the liberal Labor elite demagoguery. Right, and it is a problem. I mean, that is a problem, and that's why I started off with representation, as a formulative structure of this interview, because, I mean, yes, you'd have 25 million people who live inside an actual machine that pretty much functions as a corporation, but how are they represented correctly and properly? And you know what I mean? It's because now there's technically those systems that are set up to do that, but I guess it just comes down to the output. What is the output structure of your joint stock corp? What is the CEO trying to output? Because if you're a CEO of a company, your output structure is
you're trying to
profit and customer service, and and holding the whole company together and growing it, employing more people, falling within the government regulations. you know, doing everything as efficiently. It comes down to profit and customer service at the end of the day, right? So what is
You hit
that
the nail
look
on the
like
head.
for a government? Because governments don't have profit incentives. Governments don't need profit incentives. Governments basically function off debt, right? They can just print cash if they need it.
Yeah, but first of all, they shouldn't necessarily do that. I think you would agree with me if your show's called Detonation. Excuse me. And second of all, the point that you're trying to make, I understand what you mean. Like, first of all, I think governments do have incentives, like profit incentive structures, whether or not it's formal or informal. I think it's still there. One of the questions in my notes is, what is the Blair effect? So maybe we can talk about that in a second. But just to quickly answer your question, what is like the CEO, for example, what's their profit incentive? And the answer is the same as every other profit incentive. They're trying to get rich. You have two options. One of them is the Singapore way, and this is what I would think would happen a lot more of the time because you have a lot more to gain, where you slowly grow a country, you're profiting off of it as the CEO, as the head. That country gets bigger, that country gets wealthier. Over time, you get wealthier. Not only that, interesting tidbit, the Singaporean Prime Minister is currently the son of the previous Prime Minister. So this is kind of, I'm not sitting here advocating for a monarchy, but what I am pointing out is that evolution's way of sorting out this problem of how do we maintain a long-term security and just flourishing, I suppose, of a policy.
Are you familiar with Hans Berman Hopper?
Yeah, big
Well,
influence.
then that's what you're talking about, because Hans
That's,
Berman
yeah,
Hopper goes on
it's all
about the
coming
fact that
circle. It's coming around in a circle, eh?
that democracy is a short-lived structural inefficiency because it has to dish out as many goods as it can to win as many votes as it can, so it extracts as many resources as it can, and it only survives in the very, very short run. Kings, for example, or monarchs or something, they have a long-term future vision because they want to pass it on to their son.
Land.
Yeah. Yeah,
Cool.
they have a lot. They have a long-term structure, and so maybe instead of saying, "Okay, you want a king," which luckily in this country we still have the queen. I mean, like I say, luckily, but I kind of do mean that. It's been good. It hasn't been a negative. We've derived a lot of benefits from that. But yeah, instead of a CEO, maybe if you just replace that with a king, is that still?
That's kind of what we're going for. I mean, like, look at the word CEO, chief. Like, it says it's the first word. Like, where do we get chiefs from?
Yeah, and the thing about a CEO or a king or a monarch or somebody high is that they generate demand for luxury resources, which makes your country want to produce luxury resources. And they want to hand those luxury resources down to the next generation, which is why any sophisticated societal structure, civilization state, nation state, civilization state more likely, has always had some sort of monarchy or some sort of prestigious role throughout history, because they create that demand for luxury resources. It puts pressure downward on society to perform better, and they have a long-term vision, and then they go above and beyond the woes of the common people, and they actually think structurally about the whole entity as opposed to thinking about representing certain constituents. And that's, sometimes that can get off in corruption and stuff, but then, like in the French Revolution, if it goes bad, I mean, chop the heads off, right?
What a revolution,
Yeah, so what is the Blair effect and how do we avoid it?
The Blair effect this is not a celebism, unfortunately, but it's when a politician comes into power and they they make a bunch of legislation which benefits them in the future. Like, let's say they have an oil company or something, or they have shares in an oil company, and they make it easier for that oil company to profit through legislation. Well, when they leave office and they start profiting off of it, that's an example of the Blair effect. A significantly worse aspect of the Blair effect was when they make, a significantly worse type of or expression of the Blair effect is not so much when they try to profit off of something, but rather they just make legislation which makes them necessary in one way or another, which Blair has actually done. That's the Blair effect in a nutshell. It's politicians that come in and make legislation that benefits them in one way or another.
Yeah, It's not what you want. Mostly, you want legislation.
It's absolutely right. It is so commonplace in modern political institutions that it's barely named, but it's very much there. Especially, you got to trust me. Sometimes as a son of a senior level public executive, whatever. There's a lot of it which never makes the papers, never makes the news, never makes this, never makes that, and not because it's necessarily bad or illegal. It's just the way things are done.
Yeah. How do social attitudes reflect or reinforce our relationship with national debt?
I don't know. It's definitely an interesting question. It's actually sort of an unfair question when I think about it, because I've got friends that have really, I would say, silly attitudes to debt or to national debt when it comes around. They sort of don't understand, like they sort of have this idea, like they don't put it in so many words, that you can just sort of infinitely service debt. And I don't know, I'm personally don't think that's a very, what's the word I'm looking for, robust solution. But what do you think?
How do social attitudes reflect or reinforce our relationship
just
with
like,
national debt?
do you have any mates that seem to have a very poor understanding of, like I had a friend who, when the Libs came out with their budget surplus, and I was excited. I was like, wow, Australia never has budget surpluses. This is a good thing. And then this person was upset because they didn't care about the budget surplus. They wanted more money spent on foreign aid, and I can't remember the other one, but at least foreign aid.
Well, hang on. Like if they're worrying about where the money is spent, that's different from debt, right? Because debt, as a government, governments have a different relationship to debt. I'd never advocate eliminating national debt, because governments and big mega corporations have different relationship to debt than normal people. Normal people get a mortgage because they want to accelerate their returns. They're trying to bet on accelerating returns, that maybe that house value will go up, that they can live in an asset that may or may not, but hopefully will go up over time, that they can use it as a storage facility and as somewhere to batten down while they build a working relationship with whoever, with their company or wherever they're working with. Corporations use debt as part of daily function, daily living. Without debt, corporations die. They take in huge amounts of debt, depending on the size of the corporation.
As it stands, they die.
Sure, they take in debt every day. That services their needs, and then that comes off at the end of the week, and then they flush it out, and then they work their profits out from the back. Banks have obviously a good relationship with debt, but for them, debt is in the liabilities part, because each piece of debt that they issue is a liability for them, in the fact that they need to make a return and they need to ensure that they can get that back, and that's not always the case. And in a 2007 style mega crash, subprime mortgage and all that, banks, we attack the, George Bush or Obama or whoever for initiating bailouts, but you can see how much strife banks would get into when they really over leverage their debt capacity, because they get on the same sugar high, cocaine high that everybody else does, whether or not they know it. And I don't think the CEOs of Bear Stearns or someone like that, or Morgan Stanley or whatever, were thinking, yeah, my company's going to disappear. Hooray! I'm really excited because I'm gonna, No, I don't think that's how they think. Right. They don't want to ruin their relationship just as much as anyone else, but they happen to be the like a game of musical chairs. They happen to be the one who didn't get down on the chair, and they're the ones left standing, right? So. They're different. Their relationship with debt is in the liability sector, but government debt is different again, because government. Look, I like surpluses as much as the next person with government debt, but when you got negative interest rates globally, or you've got near record 0% interest rates, I mean, yes, it's easier for them to pay off the debt, but also it's almost free money, because they can borrow I don't know, $1 billion, $10 billion, $30 billion at near 0%. I mean, why wouldn't you do it? It's almost free money. It's almost free cash. I mean, why wouldn't you do it at 1%? I mean, if your country can't pay that back, then you've got some serious problems with your country. I mean, that's the relationship that government has with debt, because they can make multi-gazillions, $100 billion loans or whatever, at those sorts of rates. So, I don't think, if we go into negative interest rate territory, I mean, they'd be getting paid to loan that money. But I don't know. Well, that's a whole new world. We've never seen that.
Yeah, I was reading that the other day, actually, in like a Guardian article or something. I don't quite understand how that's supposed to work. Do you have any idea how the negative interest rates are supposed to work?
Well, I'll tell you what. If I'm going to get paid to loan money, I'm gonna loan money.
Yeah, fucking no.
Yeah, I'll lock it in. Like, I'll lock it in. This isn't financial advice or whatever, but I'll lock that in. I'll say, yeah, I'll take some money, and then you pay me to loan it, for sure. I mean, if that's the desperate state of the economy, that they'll have to pay people to loan money to consume goods, I mean, Keynesianism has failed massively. I mean, it's dead. It's over. The global project is over. But in the meantime, if that's the sugar hip that keeps it up, and I'm going to benefit my tiny little way from that, I mean, I'll do that. But yeah, the negative interest rates thing is, we have never seen that globally before. We've never really even seen rates down this low for this long before. And where's all that excess money going? It's all going into the stock market. It's all going into the bond market. It's all going into real estate once again. Yeah, it's all, yeah. So, I'm not buying houses at the moment because, one day that real estate market will crash again. One day those stocks will crash again. Once the sugar high is over. Maybe I'll get a loan to do some gearing. Maybe I'll get a loan to do some gearing and buy into that when that all comes back down. It's all inflated right now, and it's all inflated off the back of a demographic bubble. And that demographic bubble is almost the largest bubble in human history, which is the baby boomers, right? If not the largest.
Yeah, the largest. Yeah.
Yeah, it's massive. I mean, it's a massive mega bubble, and you're not gonna. You can't muck with that. So you're looking at a time frame between now and 2022, 23, 24, stretching out late 24, and then that era is over. I mean, that's long gone. All those baby boomers have moved in retirement. They've taken all their money out of the stock market. They've taken their money, put it into the bond market. They'll be downsizing their mega houses, their McMansions all over the place, and they'll be going down into smaller things, which means that there's going to be a lot of real estate dumped onto the market, which means that the values of all that real estate, all those homes and stuff, is going to crash the real estate prices. So, and then that means interest rates is going to go up massively. So, this is detonation, right? I mean, if you're not prepared on your debt side in the next 4 or 5 years for that sort of thing, I mean, you could see a massive spike in interest rates. I don't know, 20%. I don't know where it's going to stop. But it's going to rise. I mean, those people just keep getting older, and they do what they do, which is, go into retirement homes and downsize their houses and sell the farms and. To take their money out of stocks, because right now they're all in the market because they're all looking for mythical 1% yields. I mean, some of them are doing okay. But no. The other thing is you've got millennials and X's who can't put their money in banks because like the interest rates are so low, you're not going to get a return. Even if you have a lot of money and you put it in there at anything below 1.75, you're not going to make back because inflation is above 1.75. So you're not even going to make money. You're only going to be losing money. So, Gen X's and millennials have been looking for places to dump their money as well because they can't dump it into banks. So some millennials have now gone over their heads with houses that are too big, or whatever, and they don't have families or whatever. So they're going to have problems. Gen X's, there's a huge amount of Gen X's that have gone into cryptos and stuff like that. That's where a lot of the crypto money is, actually. It's millennials have got on board, but not as big as Gen X's, because Gen X's are like feeling the pinch. Because the reason that Gen X's are feeling the pinch is because they're in the wash of the baby boomers who took and created all the jobs, and then they held the jobs. And so the Gen X's are coming up behind, and they're saying, we can't get a job. Gen X is a big jobless generation. They've found it very hard because they sit there in just like bottom or middle management just. And very few Gen X's have ever made it above that because the baby boomers have just held on to those positions for so long now. That Gen X's have been like, hey, we can't find any yield. We can't put our money in banks. We can't put our money in stocks. We can't put our money in bonds because they've ruined the bond market. They got burnt because Gen X's are always getting burnt because the baby boomers make all the money on the way up, subprime, and then it crashes, and they leave Gen X to get ruined. So a lot of the Gen X's are the ones that are actually really cranky and are really forward. If you look at a lot of the Bitcoin and crypto people, they're all in the Gen X category. It's not baby boomers. Baby boomers have...
Oh, God, no.
They're fiat people. They're right on board. That's Trump, right? Trump is the epitome of the baby boomers. He represents them. It's a kind of a fat, ignorant guy who's kind of aggressive, and he kind of... he's kind of smart, and he's kind of likes golf, and he's just this guy, and he's a bit sleazy, and he travels and does whatever he wants, and that's them, and that's what they like, right? And they voted on him en masse, and they said this is kind of represents us right now, And Hillary Clinton was, the other one, a kind of a mean, nasty woman, if you take Trump's words out of it. So, and she's the same sort of character, and it's kind of that's them, and a bit of a. It's not going to be probably as horrible as it's going to be different. I mean, it's going to be really different to see millennials when they hit that age and how they turn out, because they're going to be.
History will repeat itself. Don't you worry.
It's going to be different. I mean, because they're more narcissistic. They're more.
Instead of people calling them transphobes or something, they'll be calling them like transracial phobes, if that makes any sense. Like, someone that's transracial. Like,
well, we're here on transhumanism, and I mean, we're talking about morphological freedom. I mean, we want to see human animal hybrids or something. I mean, we don't. I mean, it's fine with me. I mean, whatever you want. I'm a libertarian.
Want to see that, or you just want the freedom for that to happen?
I don't want it for myself, but I want to, if people want to become human-animal hybrids, go for it.
Yeah, I don't reckon that's happening too soon, but that's just me.
Yeah, no, I don't think it's going to happen too soon. But if you develop a heart condition and you're sitting with one of those people that needs a heart transplant or something, and you got to sit in an organ donor list, and we could get it from a pig. I wouldn't want to say, oh, by the way, we could get it from a pig, but we're gonna let you sit on the human wait list, and you might die while you're waiting.
No, that would be a foolish use of resources.
Yeah, no, we're gonna get it out of the pig, right? So that's no problem with that. I mean, we got to put human life first. I mean, above pigs, right? So
there's a lot of people that disagree with you on that.
Well, look at the amount of abuse that pigs have had to endure, and just, I don't know, pick any restaurant. I mean, the incredible amount of abuse. I mean, if you could, the pork industry or whatever has done to the world, or done to the pig population globally. I mean, if you're going to argue against one fraction of 1/10 of that because it helps humans, I mean, are you going to still argue against the whole pork industry? I mean, which end are you going to go? You're going to go tackle Steele talking about 1/10 of 1% that actually benefits humanity by giving grandma a new heart, or are you gonna go actually talk about the whole pork industry and all the abuse, like PETA or something?
Yeah,
I mean,
yeah,
pick
yeah.
one.
I understand where you're coming from for sure.
Yeah, and if you're going to argue against the whole thing, then where do you draw the line with humans who are dying because they can't access organ transplants?
Oh yeah, I think that's an excellent talking point. It's funny. I had a lecturer at uni called Adrian Brody, who was one of these people I was talking about that would disagree with you. In his own words, to paraphrase him roughly, he said that basically, if you're an animal and your habitat is being attacked by loggers or whatever, then he cares a lot about your rights. Whereas if you're a human being that's like starving on the streets of Delhi, like he just doesn't care. In fact, in his words, I don't give a fuck about you.
Yeah, well, in really highly populated countries, human life is cheap because it's a simple supply and demand algorithm, right? It's a factor. The supply of people is really high, the demand for people is really low. Therefore, the value of those people is low. Therefore, your example of some dude sitting around in Delhi on the street, the demand for him and the respect for him is much lower. The only fact that it's even given a boost is the fact that humans are a sort of social creature and they care for their own kind a little bit, and they go, I guess I should do something about that, maybe even think about it in this, you know what I mean? But really, it's a supply and demand factor. In a country like Switzerland, where you've got a low supply of people and a high demand for people and a high investment in those people, you see someone like that, and suddenly you really care about them because hundreds of thousands, if not millions of dollars have been pumped into that person through education and water and sewage and all this other stuff, and they become a really valuable person, right?
Yeah, of course. Switzerland's definitely on my list of countries that's doing pretty fantastically. Switzerland, Liechtenstein, Singapore. Australia's actually run very well, all things considered. Kicks the crap out of America, that's for sure, and England. I suppose we're kind of just the combination of the two, so we kind of get the best of both worlds.
Yeah, and we're in a very good region of the world for wealth.
Yeah, the lucky country. It's super true. Just something I used to learn when I was a kid. They're like, "Why is Australia the lucky country?" Write us an essay of 500 words, and like, it's only really these days that I understand. Like, holy shit, we're so geopolitically isolated, sort of tucked away down there. It's just, I don't know, it's great. Love this country.
Yeah, I do like this country, and and it's going to be interesting. I mean, what do you think about Indonesia being right there? Are you worried? Are you in this whole propaganda fear campaign, or are you not worried about them?
Well, I'm definitely not on the propaganda fear campaign. I don't know really enough to comment, but I wouldn't be afraid. I can't think of too many things across the course of history that would give many Australians reason to be afraid of foreign powers. I don't have too much.
The only time was Japan and Japan in the 45, 40s, 43, something like that, bombing Darwin. Yeah. I mean, they kind of made it down here.
Kind of.
Yeah. Oh, what? Yeah. All right. Cool. So, what is the relationship between the rise of industry, the rise of science, and the rise of?
I think it's a very interesting question, actually. So I think I should ask you first. Like, what do you think is the relationship between these three things? We seem to have had three big spikes in the last 250 years: science, industry, democracy. Is there anything that ties them together?
Well, it's the middle class, because it's industry generates efficiencies, which generates wealth, which generates free time, and you already have the ideas of the Enlightenment, which is scientific thinking and rational thinking. And then once those people start to think in that way, they become richer, and then they want more rights, and they want better workplaces, and they want collective bargaining, and they want all that sort of stuff. And so then they want democratic rights, and if they can't get it through their companies and they're still losing limbs or whatever, they go through the state, and then they organize and they say, hey, we need rights through the state. So they use the Magna Carta, they use innovations in state mechanisms, in constitutional changes and stuff like that. Then a democracy sort of evolves. They already had a parliamentary system in the UK. That the king wasn't an absolute ruler for a long time. He had to balance it against the House of Reps and the House of Lords, for example. But that sort of idea, and so the people wanted representation. The people want better workplaces. They want fairer laws to do with daily living. They wanted more say in workers' rights and
There's a lot
foreign
more
policy.
wealth. They want more of they want that to be shared around.
And it's because you have a burgeoning middle class.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I'd say all of those things are true. Well, yeah, okay. So that's definitely an important point about the rise of the middle class and how that's tied to the Enlightenment. Because you're right, there wasn't really a middle class as we understand it before that. What I do think is interesting is to take into account two things actually. One is the rise of nation states. So nation states, this happened once in Egypt, again in Han China, and then it didn't happen again really till England in the 17th century and France as well in the French Revolution. And then you have this idea of nation states that just has what's called a selective sweep, but just starts replicating itself across gajillions and gajillions of different polities. We've seen two nation states for thousands of years, and then we saw an uncountable number, however many we have today. The second thing to note is that coincides with that rise of democracy that I'm talking about in that question. So what's interesting is the rise of nation states you don't see very often, but it turns out, seems at least from this sample set, that as soon as you do have one that's successful, it multiplies quite a lot. Democracy is not like that. Democracy has popped up quite a lot across the course of history in the ancient and modern world. And until very recently, had a very bad rap, actually. Democracy was sort of summarized as me paying for your mistakes. Anyway, but the idea is that maybe just arbitrarily, this democracy idea has infused itself with this nation-state idea, and now it can be replicated, and has replicated quite a lot. So we were talking before about the Blair effects, and something that the Blair effects has, like, obviously it's very inefficient. You kind of just burn money out of your governing apparatus. And so that would have just been unacceptable. Not only would it have been unacceptable, in kingdoms 500, 1,000 years ago, it would have been unsustainable. So, and that's an important word, sustainability. So what's sustainability? Well, sustainability is just sustaining any way of life that you have it as it is. So people talk about how they want to become more sustainable, and they say, which we should all grow farms and stuff, and we'll just be an agrarian culture that's nice and sustainable. And I'm like, okay, but that's not sustainable. It's not sustaining my way of life. It's not sustaining a lack of polio. It's not sustaining plastic straws. It's not sustaining ducted heating, so on and so forth. So what people need to understand about sustainability is that it actually requires more and more resources, asymptotically more and more resources, to maintain your level of sustainability. So you need an increasing amount of complexity, which back in the day meant that if you wanted to increase the amount of complexity that you wanted your society to engage in, people had to work harder. So a good example of this is the Roman Empire. So the Roman Empire, and this seems ridiculous to us, but I did a little envelope calculation, and basically the Roman Empire was lasting on about half a tablespoon of petroleum oil per person, per square meter, per year, which is tiny amount of energy compared to what we do these days. And then when they wanted to sustain their way of life after the crisis of the 3rd century, they effectively doubled the bureaucracy and started spending more money, started taxing people more, which meant they had to work more. So, because the entire Roman Empire was solar powered, obviously. So with the energy stuff, it went from about half a tablespoon to about 2 tablespoons per person, per square meter, per year. So again, tiny, absolutely tiny. Like, wouldn't get me in my car to work for one day. But at the moment, we have a lot of things converging. We have the Blair effect, which should have meant that we were rendered unsustainable long ago. We have the rise of the advent of science and the rise of industrialization. So what's important, I think, is to note that the only reason that the Blair effect hasn't kneecapped us already is because we're currently in a very special age, historically speaking, where we've tapped fossil fuels. So once a civilization has the ability to tap fossil fuels, they effectively have this ability to put what I would call their sustainability debt on hold indefinitely. So that's what I think is the major relationship between the rise of industry science and democracy. Democracy has basically got us to spend zillions and zillions and zillions in resources, which, thank God, we were only able to come up with 150, 200 years ago.
Yeah, that's super interesting, actually. Yeah. So the Blair effect. Okay, I get that. That's a good argument. Industry, science, and democracy. What progress and or progressivism? What will progress and or progressivism look like in 50 years?
This is the last
years,
question.
200 years, and
what do you think? Because I think this is a good question for anyone. Like, just what do you think?
Well, I guess you have to start with what is progressivism at the start of that.
The word means positive change, which so obviously we should all want to be progressives in that sense, but obviously it's a bit naive.
Yeah, sure. Even conservatives sort of want to be progressives. I mean, because in the fact that they want slow incremental change as opposed to unorderly, unorthodox sort of change, and quote unquote progressives usually lean more towards the unorderly side, as opposed to conservatives, which lean more towards safer incremental progressivism. So I guess you have to sort of pick a factor and where you want to sit on that spectrum. But let's just say we're going to track on a medium of that, closer to progressivism, unorthodox, because of technological change and technological advancement. And geopolitical change. So let's say progressivism in 50 years, to me, looks like we'll have hit the singularity by then. Huge innovations in technological change to the point where the world will not look the same. Massive innovations in solar, nuclear, sustainable energy. I think fossil fuels will be a thing of the past in a way. Not completely, not by then, not 50 years, 100 years certainly, but 50 years, the age of the talk about fossil fuels being a dominant factor will have waned, as I think a lot of people will be talking about ethanol, though, whether it's moral or not, because there will be a lot of food problems in that time, and
that's just fuel sort of stuff.
Yeah, and Trump, for example, is converting a lot of excess wheat stores to ethanol, and it's kind of an interesting anyway. But so to me, progressivism looks like massive technological change, technological change cognitively, technological change in energy, in solar cars, electric cars will be almost the norm by then. You're looking at the Internet of Things with with smart walls and smart paper. Human health will be a lot more efficient with smart toilets and stuff like that. So in technological terms, you're looking at very positive sort of advancements in that way. In the rest of the way, you're looking at the rise of androids, the rise of robots, the rise of new sentient beings. You're looking at space tourism, space colonization becoming something that's absolutely on the radar. People could probably be visiting space in the 50 years. I'm not sure if it's regular by then, but it's absolutely almost there. Space elevator. But I think also you're going to see a lot of mental disorders and more mental health issues. I think we're heading into a big global mental health crisis with VR. You're looking at a lot of global initiatives to tackle mental health issues. I think you are going to see a shifting from the United Nations to Asia in a way. Some of these global institutions, so you'll see a lot more sort of Asian ideas floating around the world.
Hopefully from Singapore.
Yeah, China we'll have to see what happens with China, whether or not how big it can, because it could reshape progressivism massively, because it's going to expand Confucianism and Taoism, and some others in an interesting way, just the way that Christianity. I don't know. It depends if China wants to be expansionary or not. That's up to China. 100 years. There's a lot. There's so much that can go on in 50 years.
There's a lot. Yeah, it's okay. Like, you don't need to keep going.
But 100 years, you're looking at almost an unrecognizable world. People could be immortal by then. We'll definitely be sharing the world with a super AI by then, benevolent or not sure.
Maybe.
It's getting hard to think about that. I mean, but yeah, we're gonna have to share the world with a lot more
Yes and
sentient
no.
beings.
Like, what about that, like the Lindy effect? You know, like, are there going to be chairs 100 years from now?
Chairs are interesting. It's interesting you bring up chairs. Chairs are a very transhumanist technology. If you go back in history and you look at chairs, I mean, only the rich people, the very rich, and or God or kings or whatever, in paintings, they had chairs. You know what I mean? Like Zeus sits on a chair or something, but or Abraham Lincoln sits on a chair, because chairs were kind of rare, but they're proliferated now. I mean, they're all in the buildings behind me. They're everywhere. They're cheap. They're easy to access. Whatever. So it depends on mind uploading and stuff like that. But yeah, chairs will be here.
Okay, yeah. Well, I'm glad that you think that, because I don't know, you'd be a bit crazy otherwise. Even if you're wrong, like, I would still say that, like, I would always answer that in 100 years chairs will be around, because they were here 3,000 years ago. Again, just based purely on the Lindy law or Lindy effect. I can't remember which one it is, but that's how the Lindy law works. If it's been here for longer, it's got a higher probability of staying here for longer.
Yeah. And what do you think about 50 years of progressivism?
Oof, yeah, that's it. It all comes down to that word. What does that word actually mean? And the answer, like, here is, I don't know. All of the stuff you said to do with tech, I can totally back, and I think that that's definitely, like, especially anything to do with energy or sustainability in that sector. Like, that's, I can totally get behind that, and I would be very happy for that to be a part of the progressive agenda, and I think it is. What I think you will get is just random bullshit that you wouldn't be able to possibly really predict. So, I mean, like, if you go back in time 150 years and you go talk to a cowboy and you ask them what they think what their opinion is on abortion in the third trimester, then they're probably just going to shoot you or something. Because, like, the third trimester, they'd just be like, what do you mean? You can't abort the baby at all. Because that wouldn't even be conservative for them. Like, it might be progressive for them to even not shoot you or whatever. Exactly. So these things change, and, like, if you went back and you asked them, what do you think of transgender people? Nothing against transgender people, but, like, the cowboy's just gonna have no fucking idea what you're talking about. And, like, yeah, I think that you can say the same thing for, like, the cultural aspects of progressivism in the next 50 to 100 years. Like, you probably will see some transracialism. You'll be seeing an increasing number of people saying that I was born in the wrong race's body, stuff like that. It's unbelievably difficult to predict, but whatever it is, it's always non-falsifiable.
Yeah, and like, I agree, and I think it's interesting. It's really, yeah, you're right. It depends on what that word progressivism means. If it, are we going to end up being a bunch of vegan? Like, demographically, if you map it out, which is what I like to do, you're looking at a more religious world, because secular people don't have as many children as religious people. So you end up with a more religious world, which is interesting, because I think there's going to be a rise in transhumanism. I think transhumanism is on the march. I think I think people want to and will want to transcend their biology. I think they want to escape their biology or limits of their biology. So you will see supermen and superwomen and super whatevers. I think you're right. I think transracialism is going to become a problem or an issue or a factor or whatever, where people, but that's just a wider argument about morphological freedom, about this fact that people are waking up to the consciousness of their own limits of their own biology, because we do have the academic foresight of looking back through history and going, oh God, do you really want to repeat this for another 300 years? People, are born, they fall in love, they have kids, they die, then repeat and repeat and repeat. I mean, it's boring, right? I mean, we've been doing it forever, and I think people are sick of it, and they want to try something new, and they want to experience something new. Even if they want to experience the same old thing, but on a different planet, I think they'll do that. I think they'll just go to Mars and say, okay, well, at least we can experience that form of biological interaction out here on a different planet, and that's something new, because doing it on Earth is getting boring. Mega cities, absolutely. You're looking at vertical farming. You're looking at highly dense, coordinated cities. I don't, this whole talk of regionalism and all this. I don't really. It's obviously government policies will try and entice people out to the suburbs, but I think the buildings are just going to get bigger and taller. To be honest, and you're going to end up with super cities and super skyscrapers where people are going to want to just live together in big communal groups, especially as climate change becomes a factor, and it the amount of if you're living out in a regional area and you get hit with some sort of climate factor all the time, and the government has to come and bail you out all the time, you're not going to want to put up with that a lot, when you could just be living in a mega structure where everybody's always pretty much safe. And if you go through it, a million other people go through it as well. So, so I think the rise of mega cities is pretty much on the table. And then you end up with Coruscant, where it's kind of like highly dense mega cities, cool technology, some mental health problems, people living in kind of congested areas, people not really worried about the fact that somebody's genetically sort of got bunny ears or something, or a phoenix suit or whatever, or this guy, he never came out of his room for 10 years because he's lived in a VR world his whole life. I mean, you've got that sort of independence and that sort of freedom embedded into the structure of society, because it's a sort of a don't care society. Because if you care too much, just go into VR reality and make up your own place where it's perfect.
Yeah, that's it. The whole Robert Nozick thing.
Yeah. So it's
his thing when you go into a pod. Yeah.
Yeah, it's going to be interesting. It's going to be an interesting ride, but I think transhumanism is on the march. But it's got to survive the pushback of religion, because religion hasn't yet spoken about transhumanism. It hasn't yet said anything about it because it doesn't yet see it as a threat. It doesn't yet see it as even on the radar. So I don't think they have seen it or talking about it or anything like that. But anyway, did you want to say anything else?
No, I think we caught it all. I just wanted to, I really just came on the show to fly the neo-reactionary flag and just sort of show everyone that it's not a bunch of communist libtards on the left and a bunch of Trump-tards on the right. Like, I'm not even I don't know, am I a centrist? I don't know. Like, I'm just interested in responsible, secure, effective government. Those three words.
Responsible, secure, and effective government. Yeah, it's an interesting thought. I still have reservations about representation, even within a corporate system, because I'm missing a factor there about representation, because it feels like I don't know. Anyway, thank you very much, Nick. You've been a fantastic guest.
No worries. I'll just quickly say, I think that, to put your mind at ease, I don't think representation, especially the way that we have it, is actually compatible exactly with what I'm saying. So it might be one of those things where you'd be getting rid of representation for the communal good. But again, I don't have all the answers. I don't know if I'm right.
Yeah, and it really depends on what your output is, because if your definitional outputs are great, then you might end up with something really good, Hans Werner Hoppery, where the value of your country will always increase, and you leave those elites aside because they're bored. Yeah. I mean, they've got nothing else to do but make the country better.
Yeah, I think the problem is that there's that scenario, which is actually what I think is the most likely scenario. And then there's this horrifying alternative where you just get EDM in. And that's what would be so goddamn horrifying in a non-representative government.
Yeah, I don't know. Like, yeah, I don't know. These dictators, like, yeah, but your argument isn't to throw out like constitutional rights and free speech and all that other stuff. So you know, you can't really get that, because if you do, the board of directors will just overthrow the CEO, right? Because they have some sort of limited liability contract with the company or something, right?
Well, it would depend on what the CEO in question was doing, just what the executive branch was doing. So if the executive branch was doing something such that the board of directors of parliament didn't think it was in the interests of their shareholders, i.e. mostly the Australian people, then they wouldn't get done. That CEO would get fired.
Yeah. Interesting. All right. Well, thank you very much. It's been a pleasure. Bring me more people for interviews, and it's lovely to talk to you.
I will. Lovely to talk to you too.
Good luck for the Ians if it ever goes around again. You guys did a great job.
Hopefully. All right. Talk soon, man.
Nicolas, thank you.